Hi there. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do a book review. So this is called The Road to Athens by the Fastest Man Ever over the Classic Marathon Course. And it's about Bill Adcocks, and it's written in collaboration with Trevor Frecknell. It's basically the story of it's Bill Adcocks' autobiography. So he's probably the best marathon runner we had in the 1960s. He finished in the fifth in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico in the marathon. He won the Fukuoka Marathon in Japan in 1969. He came second in the Commonwealth, what was called the equivalent of the Commonwealth Games in 1966. And he ran 18 marathons, won 5 of them, placed second in 5 of them, and another 5 where he came 4th, 5th, or 6th, and 3 that he DNF'd. He started out just as a normal club runner, and the book's in 3 parts. The first section is about his junior years from 1959 to 1962, 1963, and there's a lot of information in the book about his training. And so here's an example. You can see here what his training mileages were week by week for those particular years, 1964 to 1969. Earlier in the book, or later in the book, you've got lots of stats there, but it's not all stat heavy. There's a lot of actual reading, and if you can see close in on that picture, you can see the bit in blue, and the bits in blue are taken from his training logs. That's what he wrote in his training diary. That'd be things like couldn't train, couldn't walk properly, went to Jack Horgan, the physio who looked after many of the club's athletes, PM. He said it was sciatica, but he couldn't really hurt me. He showed me a couple of stretching exercises which I must do. Sunday, 22 miles in 2 hours, moved easy at the start and got going fairly well. Felt a bit tired over the last few miles but kept going well. Feet ached in Adidas marathon shoes. Evening, cathedral, call to mission, torch relay. Covered about 7 miles, steady running but time on legs. Monday, 6 miles, road and grass in the morning. Legs felt very tired but got it done. Lunch, 4 miles, including 9 by 110 yards, strides on grass, not too bad, calves a bit achy. Evening, 11 miles road, 55 minutes, equal fastest on this course, but didn't feel too good. But effort is there, and final speed also, so not too much wrong, most probably due to heavy weight training. Weight, 8 stone 5 pounds. So, it's not every single training log he's ever written. I mean, he's got, from what I can gather, he had kept training diaries from 1959 through to 1972 when he gave up running, with the exception of 1971. He can't find that diary, and he just takes sections of that to say what his build up to, like the Olympic Games marathon was, or to road races. I really enjoyed that because for me, as a running coach and a runner, I like the specificity of knowing what people actually did. There's a lot of stories about how old runners from the 60s and 70s used to do 100-mile weeks, but actually when you look at what Adcocks was doing, you can see that his biggest year was about 4,800 miles, and he averaged 93 miles a week. He did do some big weeks, 130 miles, but they weren't as frequent as you'd imagine. The other interesting thing was actually when he was a junior, from 18 to 22, and he was winning, county cross-country championships and things, and running miles in 4 minute 20 and sub 5 for 5 minute miles for 5 miles. That's easy for me to say. He was only doing about 30 to 40 miles a week. He was doing a lot of track work, and he didn't run his first 10-mile race until 1964, and then he tried his first marathon, and he ran 2:19 for his first marathon. So one of the things I took away from this book was really that he was a natural born endurance runner, and then he worked at it. You can't get good at something without working at it in some level. And as I said, one of those quotes, he ran 3 times a day on some of those days. He ran in the morning, he ran at lunchtime, he ran in the evening. Now that wasn't every day, that was just an example of during heavy training. But he also fitted in a full-time job as a gas fitter. He started out as an apprentice. He became a gas contractor working for the gas board, and then he went self-employed. And when he went to Mexico for 6 weeks, he wasn't earning any income, but he was happy not to do that because of his love of the amateur athletics and running and so and the chance to see the world. And again, that's an interesting thing, is hearing what he said about Mexico, hearing about his trip to Japan, how he went to Hawaii to meet one of the runners who he'd met in Japan, and those little stories. I think the only downside to the book was that it gets a little bit stats heavy, and I can cope with stats quite well, but I read it in 4 days. I mean, it's not a thick book, it's 160 pages, so I read it in about 4 days. And by the end of it, I was just getting a little bit fatigued by the constant references to such an, Evesham 10-mile race, Sutton 15, so-and-so won in this time, and I came second, and so-and-so and so-and-so. And it just got a little bit heavy on the stats in that way. I think if I'd read it over a slower period, maybe it'd been a bit more bearable, but that is also quite a, if you look at that page there's not a single bit of stats in there really. That's about, actually I lie, there is a little bit there up in the top corner, but most of it's about his going to Japan. He talks about how he didn't get invited to BBC Sports Personality of the Year, and David Coleman was on Sports Night on the Wednesday saying, oh yes, we've got all the best people in the world coming in, all the best athletes in the country coming to the Sports Personality event later on Sunday night. And Adcocks was in fume because he'd won the 3A's marathon that year and he hadn't been invited, so he phoned up the BBC and tried to get through to David Coleman. So there's little stories like that. I would have liked more of those stories, I think, and maybe there aren't as many of those stories you'd like, but also I think some of those stories are good to read. There's a little bit about club, and actually his post-athletics career was quite interesting. How once he'd finished running in 1972 after failing to qualify for the Munich Olympic Marathon, what he then went on to do for Coventry Godiva Harriers and running in general, becoming an information officer in UK athletics. So here it is again. I think it is a good book. It's quite enjoyable. I think if you aren't a stats person, you might struggle with it, but it would be easy to skip past some of his training diaries and just get that feel for what went on in the 60s, how people ran. It's not a heavy read. It's probably a very good, quick Christmas gift if you can find a copy. Enjoy.